What if the very thing you built your entire identity upon was secretly, slowly, and excruciatingly dismantling you from the inside out? What if your greatest strength was a beautifully crafted lie, and the truth was a ticking time bomb in the marrow of your own bones? Welcome back to Tales of Wonder. If you enjoy stories about ordinary people chasing extraordinary dreams and the shocking, often ironic consequences that follow, then you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit that bell because we dive deep into the human psyche every single time. Now, let's begin today's story. Leo was, by all accounts, a man carved from a different stone than the rest of us. Not a precious, glittering marble, mind you, but something more primal. A rough-hewn granite of a man. At 45, his life was a monument to quiet, unyielding discipline. He was a senior data analyst at a mid-size insurance firm, a job that involved wrestling with spreadsheets so vast and complex they would make a lesser man's eyes bleed. His world was one of fluorescent lights, the hushed click-clack of ergonomic keyboards, and the faint, ever-present smell of stale coffee and toner powder. And in the center of this soul-crushing beige universe, Leo was an island of terrifying potential. His colleagues knew him as the quiet, intensely focused man in Cubicle 4B. They didn't know that every evening, after the last pivot table was filed away, Leo would drive to a small, unassuming warehouse unit on the industrial edge of town. This was his dojo, his sanctuary, his forge. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sawdust, liniment, and old sweat. This is where Leo ceased to be Leo the data analyst and became Leo, practitioner of the iron palm. For 22 years, without fail, he had dedicated himself to this ancient, brutal art. His regimen was unrelenting. It wasn't just about punching things. It was a sacred, almost monastic ritual of self-destruction and reconstruction. He would spend hours conditioning his hands, slapping them into buckets filled with progressively more unforgiving materials. First iron filings, then sand, then small ball bearings. The thwack, thwack, thwack was a metronome measuring out the passage of his dedication. He would perform thousands of fingertip push-ups on the knuckles of his closed fists, his wrists as rigid as steel beams. His tools of a trade were not spreadsheets and flowcharts, but a worn wooden post wrapped in rope and leather, a heavy, sand-filled leather bag, and a solid oak makiwara board. The result of this decades-long obsession was a pair of hands that were, frankly, unnerving. They were broad, thick, and crisscrossed with a topography of scar tissue and calluses so dense they felt like polished riverstone to the touch. His knuckles were permanently enlarged, looking less like joints and more like a string of small, smooth pebbles embedded under the skin. He could, and occasionally did, perform party tricks for the few people he allowed into his world. He could shatter a house brick with a casual-looking chop. He could drive a 3-inch nail through a plank of pine with the heel of his palm. Once, when a drunk driver plowed into his parked car, he became so frustrated with the jammed door that he simply punched out the window. Not with a tool, not with an elbow, but with a closed fist. The safety glass exploded into 1,000 harmless cubes, and his hand didn't have scratch. This was Leo's secret identity. This was his contrast. By day, a master of abstract, digital risk assessment. By night, a master of the most tangible, physical power imaginable. He derived a deep, quiet satisfaction from this duality. While his coworkers worried about quarterly reports and office politics, Leo worried about the precise alignment of his metacarpals upon impact. He felt a profound sense of superiority, not in an arrogant way, but in the way a diamond might feel superior to a piece of coal. They were both carbon, but one had endured unimaginable pressure and emerged unbreakable. His home was a shrine to this discipline. His small, meticulously clean apartment held few decorations. There was a framed certificate for Employee of the Month from 5 years prior. And next to it, on a small, black stand, rested his most prized possession, a smooth, gray river rock about the size of his palm. It was split cleanly in two. He had done that himself 3 years ago on a retreat. It was his Excalibur. Leo's only confidant in this world was his younger sister, Clara. Clara was a physiotherapist, a woman who lived in a world of soft tissues, strained ligaments, and the delicate, beautiful mechanics of the human body. She viewed Leo's hobby with a mixture of awe and professional horror. "You're going to give yourself arthritis by the time you're 50, Leo," she'd say, shaking her head as she watched him gingerly massage a special herbal tincture into his hands after training session. The tincture, a secret recipe from his long-retired Sifu, smelled of camphor and something earthier, almost bitter. "Arthritis is for people with weak joints, Clara," Leo would reply, a faint, knowing smile on his lips. "My bones are denser than titanium. My tendons are like steel cables. This," he'd hold up his formidable hand, "is a tool that will never break." Clara would just sigh. "The body isn't a tool, Leo. It's a living system. It adapts, it compensates, but it always keeps a ledger. And one day, the bill comes due." Leo would dismiss her with a wave of that very hand. What did she know? She dealt with people who'd thrown their backs out gardening or sprained an ankle on a treadmill. She dealt with weakness. He was cultivating strength. They were speaking different languages. The first sign wasn't pain. It was a sound. It happened on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Leo was in his warehouse, working on his Makiwara post. He was practicing a technique called a Phoenix Eye Fist, striking with the knuckle of the index finger protruded. He was focused, his breathing controlled, his mind empty of everything but the impact. He threw a punch, perfect in its form, connecting with the dense, grain-packed wood. Thwack! And then, underneath the familiar, solid sound of impact, there was something else. A tiny, almost imperceptible crunch. It wasn't the sound of the wood splintering. It was a dry, internal sound like someone stepping on a piece of brittle plastic. It came from inside his hand. Leo froze, his fist still pressed against the post. He pulled it back and stared. There was no visible mark. No sudden, searing pain. Just a deep, dull ache that began to bloom in the center of his hand. A throb that felt new. It wasn't the familiar, satisfying burn of worked muscle or the surface sting of conditioned skin. This was deeper. It felt like something had happened in the very core of him. He tried to brush it off. "A tendon," he muttered to the silent warehouse. "Just a minor strain. Overenthusiasm." He'd had strains before. He finished his session, though his strikes were noticeably more cautious. But the ache didn't fade. It lingered for days, a stubborn, deep-seated thrumming that was especially pronounced in the cold morning air. He found himself waking up with a stiffness in his right hand that took longer than usual to work out. He started favoring his left hand at the office, clicking the mouse with uncharacteristic clumsiness. The escalation was slow, insidious. A month after the first crunch, he was helping a coworker move a heavy water cooler bottle. As he lifted it, his right hand, the one he'd conditioned to shatter concrete, suddenly buckled under the weight. A jolt of sharp, electric pain shot from his wrist all the way to his elbow. The bottle crashed to the floor, sending a wave of water across the office carpet. The entire office fell silent, all eyes on him. "Slippery hands," Leo stammered, his face flushing with a heat that had nothing to do with exertion. He flexed his fingers, the deep ache now a constant, unwelcome companion. That night, in a fit of frustration and denial, he went to his warehouse. He stood before the heavy bag, the symbol of his power. He took a deep breath, coiled his body, and threw a full-force right cross. The pain was immediate and blinding. It was a white-hot spike driven directly into the center of his hand. He cried out a short, sharp gasp and clutched his wrist, stumbling back. Tears of pure, unadulterated agony sprang to his eyes. For the first time in 22 years, his own power had betrayed him. The fear was now a cold knot in his stomach. He could no longer ignore Clara's warnings. The ledger she spoke of was open, and the numbers were in bright, screaming red. Sitting in the stark, sterile waiting room of the orthopedic specialist, Leo felt his identity crumbling around him. He, the Unbreakable, was here amongst the broken. The walls were adorned with cheerful posters about osteoporosis and arthritis, each one feeling like a personal accusation. Dr. Eris Thorne was a man in his 60s with a calm, analytical demeanor that reminded Leo of his own when faced with a complex data set. He listened patiently as Leo explained his training, his discipline, his lifetime of conditioning. He was careful to downplay the extremity of it, framing it as intense martial arts practice. Dr. Thorne nodded, his expression unreadable. "Let's have a look, shall we?" He examined Leo's hand, his touch clinical and precise. He noted the extraordinary calluses, the range of motion, the sheer density of the tissue. He asked Leo to make a fist to push against resistance. With each movement, Leo winced. "The pain is here," Leo said, pointing to the center of his palm, the meaty part below the fingers. "And it radiates deep, into the bones, I think." "We'll need images," Dr. Thorne said, his tone neutral. "An X-ray will give us a good starting point." Leo sat in the radiology room, placing his magnificent, broken hand on the cold plate. The machine hummed and clicked. He felt a profound sense of violation. This was his weapon, his masterpiece, being reduced to a shadow on a film. It felt like an autopsy on a living thing. Later, back in Dr. Thorne's office, the doctor clipped the large, black X-ray films to the light box. He flicked the switch, and Leo's skeleton hand was illuminated from behind. It was a ghostly, gray-white architecture against the black background. "Well, Mr. Ackerman," Dr. Thorne began, using a pen as a pointer, "your bones are, as you suggested, remarkably dense. The cortical thickness is impressive, a clear sign of long-term, high-impact stress. Your body has been remodeling itself for decades to withstand the forces you've been subjecting it to." A small, vindicated smile touched Leo's lips. See, he was strong, dense, unbreakable. However, Dr. Thorne continued, and that single word sucked all the air out of the room. The pen tip moved to the center of the image, to the cluster of small bones that made up the palm, the metacarpals. "Do you see this area here?" Leo leaned in. To his untrained eye, it just looked like a jumble of bone shapes. "This is your hamate, your capitate, your trapezoid," the doctor said, tapping each one. "The architecture of the human hand is a marvel of engineering. It's designed for dexterity and a certain amount of impact, but it's not designed to be used as a recurring blunt force instrument." He paused, letting the silence hang. "What your intensive training has done, Mr. Ackerman, is create a series of microfractures so small and so frequent that your body's remodeling process couldn't keep up. You've been breaking your hand, piece by microscopic piece, for years." Leo stared, uncomprehending. "Microfractures? But I never felt anything. Not until recently." "That's the insidious nature of it," Dr. Thorne explained. "The damage was happening below the threshold of acute pain. Your body was constantly trying to repair itself, laying down new bone material. But it was a losing battle. The breakdown was outstripping the repair. You were, in a very literal sense, turning your own bone to dust from the inside out." The room seemed to tilt. Leo's eyes were glued to the X-ray. He wasn't seeing a strong hand anymore. He was seeing a ruin. He was seeing a building that looked solid from the outside, but whose internal supports were riddled with countless hairline cracks. The technical term is chronic exertional compartment syndrome, combined with severe, cumulative stress fractures. The doctor went on, his voice calm and factual, each word a nail in the coffin of Leo's identity. "The crunch you heard was likely a larger fragment finally giving way. The constant ache is from inflammation and nerve compression in a space that's been permanently altered by scar tissue and abnormal bone growth. The twist was not a hidden identity, not a secret twin, not a long-lost inheritance. The twist was a medical fact. The ultimate, shocking truth was that his unbreakable hand was, and had always been, in a state of continuous self-inflicted collapse. The iron palm training wasn't forging a weapon. It was conducting a 22-year-long, slow-motion demolition. The very source of his power was the source of his destruction. The recovery was not a hero's journey. It was a humbling, tedious, and deeply frustrating process. There was no surgery that could magically reverse 2 decades of systematic abuse. The treatment was nothing, absolute rest, a custom splint that held his hand in a neutral position, anti-inflammatory medication. In time, Leo was forced to abandon his training. The warehouse unit gathered dust, the rent automatically deducted from his account, a monthly tombstone for his former life. The herbal tincture sat unused on his bathroom shelf, its pungent smell now a bitter mockery. The physical therapy, administered by a colleague of Clara's who knew just enough about his case to be utterly terrified of it, was agonizingly slow. He didn't start with weights or resistance bands. He started with a bowl of rice. He was instructed to plunge his hand into the dry grains and simply move his fingers slowly, gently, feeling the individual grains shift against his skin. It was an exercise for infants, for the elderly, for the weak. His life at the office changed. He was no longer the quietly intense man in cubicle 4B. He was the guy with the bulky hand brace, the one who struggled to open a jar of pickles at the company potluck. People spoke to him with a soft, pitying tone he despised. The most profound moment of his new reality came about 3 months into his recovery. He was in his kitchen, making a sandwich. A glass jar of mayonnaise sat on the counter. Out of a 22-year-old habit, he reached for it with his right hand, his mind already sending the old, familiar command: grip, crush, control. His fingers, still encased in the splint, brushed against the cool glass and simply stopped. They wouldn't close. They had no strength. A wave of such profound helplessness washed over him that he had to lean on the counter, his head bowed. He, the man who could split a river rock, could not open a jar of mayonnaise. He had to use a rubber gripper, a cheap, brightly colored piece of plastic to get the lid off. The pop of the seal, breaking, sounded like the loudest, most ironic laugh in the world. He had to sell his car. He could no longer confidently operate a manual transmission with his crippled hand. He bought a bland, automatic sedan. It felt like driving a coffin. Slowly, painfully, some function returned. But it was a different kind of function. The deep, bone-grinding ache became a permanent resident, a ghost that flared up with the rain, with cold weather, with any sudden movement. His hand was no longer a weapon. It was a delicate, flawed, and often painful instrument. He could write, he could type, he could eventually drive his soulless new car. But the power, the terrifying, unbreakable certainty, was gone. It had turned to dust, just like the bone inside. He took the split river rock, his Excalibur, off its stand and put it in a drawer. He couldn't bear to look at it anymore. It wasn't a symbol of his power. It was a headstone for it. A year passed. Leo's life found a new, quieter rhythm. He was promoted at work. His analytical mind, freed from the distraction of his nightly forging sessions, became sharper and more focused. He took up gardening of all things. He found a strange, peaceful satisfaction in the feel of soft, damp soil, in the delicate process of nurturing a seedling. His hands, though scarred and often aching, were learning a new language, the language of gentleness. One sunny Saturday, Clara came over to help him repot some orchids. They were on his small balcony, their hands covered in rich, black potting mix. The conversation was light, filled with the easy camaraderie that had deepened since his great humbling, as he now called it. As they worked, Clara paused, looking at his hands with her physiotherapist's eye. "How is it today?" "The pain." Leo flexed his right hand slowly, watching the tendons move under the thin, scarred skin. "It's there," he said honestly, "like a low-grade toothache. But it's manageable. It's part of me now." He looked out over the balcony railing at the quiet street below. A memory surfaced, unbidden. A memory of his old Sifu, a wizened old man with eyes like chips of flint, on the day Leo had successfully split his first brick. The old man had nodded, not with praise, but with a strange, almost sorrowful look. "The iron palm is not about creating a weapon, Leo," the Sifu had said, his voice a dry rustle. "It is about understanding the most profound truth of the universe." Leo, young and bursting with pride, had assumed the truth was about indomitability, about will over matter. Now, 45 years old, his hand throbbing with a dull, eternal ache, he finally understood what the old man meant. He turned to Clara, a wry, ironic smile playing on his lips, the first genuine smile in a long, long time. "You know, Clara," he said, his voice soft, "for 22 years, I thought I was making my hand unbreakable. I was conditioning it, hardening it, filling it with power. I thought I was turning it into a masterpiece of strength." He held up his right hand, letting the afternoon sun glint off the web of pale scars. But the whole time, the ultimate brutal joke was on me. The final, shocking secret of the iron palm, the one they don't put in the ancient manuals, he paused, letting the moment hang in the warm air, is that the entire, painful, lifelong training isn't about learning how to turn your hand into a weapon that can break anything else. He looked his sister directly in the eyes, his own filled with a hard-won, weary wisdom. It's about learning how to break yourself and, somehow, learning to live with the pieces. So what do you think? Is there a part of your life, a skill or a passion, that you've pursued so intensely that it might have started to change you in ways you never expected? Have you ever discovered that your greatest strength was also your most hidden weakness? If this story of hidden consequences resonated with you and made you think, then I'd appreciate it if you could give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights are what make this community so special. For more tales that explore the shocking, ironic, and deeply human sides of life, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Until next time, take care of yourselves and maybe be gentle with your hands. See you in the next video.